guest this week on Veterans Chronicles is retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Nolan. He is a veteran of World War II, where he served as a bomber pilot in Europe. Later in his career, he also worked for NASA. And Colonel Nolan, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Forest Hills, New York. That's part of New York City in Queens County.
I know Forest Hills was originally the site of the U.S. Open, correct?
Oh, yes. They were the great tennis center, really, at the time. That was it.
When did you join the service?
In 1942 is when I was sworn in. I was called to active duty in February of the following year, February 1943, into the aviation cadet program where I was trained. And that training took 9 months, and from there I went into combat.
Did you choose the Air Force or did they choose you?
No, I chose the Air Force. I was a volunteer.
Okay. And was Pearl Harbor the reason for that?
Actually, no. It probably stemmed from a passion to fly.
Oh, that you had that long before you joined the Air
Yes.
Force?
Yeah.
Explain that. Where did that come from?
I don't know, but if you look back into the, first of all, I'm a product of the Depression, and if you look back into that era, the blooming world of aviation and aviation technology just overcame a lot of kids. I happen to be one of them. Mm-hmm. And I think that passion arose out of that life. I built models, saw all the movies, Dawn Patrol and whatnot. So it was that conditioning, I think, that probably steered me. I would have done anything to learn how to fly.
Had you flown before you joined? No. Okay. And where were you sent for training?
And actually several locations in the southeast corner of the country, starting with Maxwell Air Force Base, which was for pre-flight training. From there to Cape Girardeau, Missouri for primary flight training. From there to Walnut Ridge in Arkansas for basic. From there to Freeman, Indiana for advanced. After that, I was transferred into a forming bomber group, which came together in Salt Lake and later Tucson, became one of the bomber groups of the 8th Air Force later on. I was in the group when it was formed, one of the pilots.
How did they go about determining who would be pilots and who would have other roles?
Well, that was fairly simple. There was a dearth of co-pilots that were needed to man the crews that were being formed. So instead of sending me to a training center for a bomber like the B-24, I was sent to a group that was forming as a co-pilot. Very, very unhappy. I wanted to fly fighters. Explain
what the training was like once you finally got in the cockpit. You've had this passion. Was it everything you thought it would be?
Yes. Especially in the early phases of primary flight training. The first flight I ever took was something that I'll never forget. I can still hear the wheels rumbling in the grass below me and breaking free. It was something that, a memorable thing in your memory. It's something you never forget.
Sounds like it came naturally to you.
It did.
So you mentioned that you were called up in 43, and so when were you ultimately deployed to Europe?
In April of 1944.
44. And where were you sent then?
To a little town called Lavenham in the UK in Suffolk County. It's about 30 miles from Cambridge. That's where our air base was. Forever known as Lavenham.
And how long between then and actually going into combat?
I think my first mission was on the 11th of May.
Pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so.
How would you describe that? It's one thing to train, it's another thing to actually do it.
Well, it was sort of a milk run, an easy mission. It was an airfield in France. I think it was Lyon or someplace like that, where we saw very little opposition, so it was in and out. Not a big deal. 2 missions later, that changed. The target was near Hanover in Germany, an oil plant, and that's where I got my birth of combat.
Describe the mission. What was the target?
An oil plant, and oil became one of the significant targets at this time in the strategy that was being used to direct the 8th Bomber Command. There were 72 targets that were listed as priority targets. There were several oil plants in Germany, especially the synthetic oil plants, which are the plants that we went after. One was at Hanover. That's well defended. It was beyond belief, just experiencing the flak barrage that we had to fly through. I saw my first airplane go down in flames and that kind of thing.
Is that a escort plane?
No, it was a bomber.
Another bomber.
Another B-24.
How did that affect you?
It got my attention. It got my attention.
How did you respond to the anti-aircraft coming at you, the flak?
Great fear. It was astounding. There was no way to describe it. You just couldn't believe you could fly through it, and somehow you did. The flak was our number one enemy, by the way. We lost more aircraft to flak in 1944 than we did to German fighters. In fact, I was brought down by flak on one mission. This was in July of 1944 in a B-24.
Describe what happened there.
Well, we were on our way in. We entered the coast somewhere between Dunkirk and Ostend in Belgium, and there was a flak battery that apparently that the Germans put there. They knew that we liked to go in at that point. We always tried to find a corridor which would be flak-free. The Germans caught on to that, and apparently they put a flak battery down there. And as we entered the coast, we took a hit on the left, just below the left wing. An 88 millimeter shell exploded. Took out both the engines on the left side of the airplane, number 1 and number 2. Number 2 engine, we were able to feather it, if you know what that means, to stop the rotation of the propeller. Okay. A dead engine doesn't produce thrust, even if the propeller is turning. The idea is to turn the propeller to stop it. Number 1 propeller, we could not stop it. It became what we call a runaway. So the drag on the left side of the aircraft was terrific. We were going down. We managed to get back over the channel and got rid of the bombs. Once we had done that, we were able to get the nose under control. It's only about 25 miles from Dunkirk to the east coast of England. Mm-hmm. And there was an airfield right on the coast. It's called Bradwell Bay. It was an RAF base. And we managed to get the airplane on a runway on that base. So that nobody got hurt.
That's fantastic. What did the plane look like when you got out and took a look at it?
It was kind of a mess. There was a big hole in the leading edge of the wing between the 2 engines. And my understanding, I thought the airplane was written off, but my understanding was that it was recovered, re-engined, and put back in service, but lost again. Neither one of the airplanes that I flew, by the way, survived the war. The B-24 went down again in February of '45. My B-17 went down over another oil plant called Merseburg. We called it Mercilessburg. That was really well defended. But anyway, it went down there. The crew got out, but the airplane was lost. I flew both the B-24 and the B-17, by the way, in combat.
I read that. Which did you prefer?
B-17.
Why is that?
Mainly because of altitude. The B-24, even with superchargers, was not really manageable above, say, 22,000 feet when you loaded it up with bombs and fuel. The B-17 at 28,000 was a pussycat. Just a difference in handling the 2 aircraft. It was a lot easier to fly. Believe it or not, because you're measuring it in true airspeed, it went faster than a B-24, and it went farther because of the management of the engines with using less fuel. So, It was a better airplane in that theater.
Did it make you safer, do you think?
Oh, no. No, the targets got rougher. We went in deeper. I flew 11 missions in the B-17. 9 of them were against big cities, Dusseldorf and Magdeburg and so on.
So as you got closer to the heart of Germany, the resistance got fiercer.
Right.
How did you deal with that?
Well, by this time you're committed to a tour. The idea was 25 missions was, if you look at the loss rates, it's postulated that somewhere you could expect on a combat tour to finish maybe half of your missions. Mm-hmm. You'd go down and be killed. That was the odds. So there was a contract that was established for 25 missions initially. As the war went on, they extended that to 30, and then as the war went on a little longer, they made it 35. But with a catch-22 about it on the last one, 35 missions. But if you flew 30, you could go home on a 30-day leave, but you had to come back and fly another tours. So I opted to fly 35. I only flew 33, but that's a long story. You don't want to go there.
Mr. Nolan, let's hold it right there for just a moment. We'll come right back and hear more of your story. We're speaking with World War II veteran and retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Nolan on Veterans Chronicles. We're back on Veterans Chronicles. I'm Greg Corombos. Thanks for being with us. Honored to be joined in studio today by Bernard Nolan. He is a World War II veteran and a veteran of the United States Air Force, retiring with the rank of Lieutenant Colonel. And, sir, we were just talking about the incredibly dramatic missions as you described them, being a bomber pilot, very harrowing work in the European theater and the Pacific theater in World War II. I guess one of my first questions in this segment is how they put the crews together. Did you work with the same crew as long as you were all able-bodied to serve, or did they mix you around some?
No, in the combat experience, we had an assigned crew. We started with in training in the U.S. before we were deployed. We stayed with that crew right through to the end. There were one or two missions that I flew with other crews, but normally we remained together and intact. The crew that I flew with the pilot in command was one Charles Eubank. He and I were both at the exalted rank of first lieutenants. And the other crew members were all fixed with that arrangement right through the end. I went home. I actually flew 2 missions fewer than they did. They finished their tour at 35. I had to stand down on 2 missions while they brought in a replacement pilot to give him some experience. So as a result of that, the crew that I started with, the Eubank crew, when they had their 35th mission, I flew my 33rd. When we got back, the squadron commander didn't know what to do with me, so he sent me home.
What did you notice about crew cohesion as you did this more and more and more? Obviously, every mission's a little bit different, but just kind of having instincts about what the other one would do.
Oh, no, the crew was really formed as a team, very tight. You know.
It almost worked like a smooth-running machine at one point.
It did, absolutely.
Wow. Are you still close to some of those guys over the years?
As far as I know, I may be the only one left. And I last communicated with the bombardier one, David Wilcox, but this was a few years ago, and he was in Alaska. I don't think he's survived.
I can just imagine the bonds that would develop.
Yeah, really.
In that sort of environment.
They did. We maintained contact up through the years to a certain point, but then eventually it sort of got dispersed. There is an organization of our group, an association, if you like, the 487th Bomb Group Association, and they have annual meetings and that sort of thing. So that's the only contact that I have with that world now.
You mentioned, I think it was the mission you mentioned where you had to make an emergency landing back in England was in July of 1944. that's right about the time of the breakout. And so obviously things are going very well for the Allies. How much did that buoy your spirits? Was that a major inspiration for you, or just knowing what you had to do with each mission, was that more your focus?
No, we were actually greatly encouraged by what was happening on the continent with the ground forces at that time. They're moving actually through France. I think Paris fell somewhere around that time. Mm-hmm. I can't remember the exact date, but all of that was very encouraging. There was a great battle of the Falaise Pocket, which was a great victory, and things like that were happening that painted a rosy picture. It didn't change our world very much. We continued to fly the missions that we flew deep into Germany, but the war posture of the war itself was beginning to change, and we could see it and appreciate it.
How'd you see that from the sky? You mentioned earlier that as you got further into Germany, the more intense their resistance came. But how did you see the momentum of the Allies as part of your missions?
I think probably just the weight of the buildup of the 8th Air Force. By the time that my group was deployed, there was something like 40 bomb groups in the 8th Bomber Command. Each bomb group had 4 squadrons. Each squadron had 18 aircraft and 18 crews. So if you multiply all that out, a group is like 72 aircraft and crews times 4. You get some idea of the weight of all of this. And you're aware of the fact that the German fighter attacks are now abated. Your main enemy is flak. You don't see the fighters like they did in the early days of '43, and the missions that were flown at that time were really very costly. I'm sure you've heard of things like Regensburg, Schweinfurt. One mission, we lost 60 bombers out of like 240 that were deployed. Get some idea of that.
Right, it's a quarter of the force.
You can't live with loss rates like that. They lost 60 again in another mission to Schweinfurt. Magdeburg, all of them took a toll. But anyway, that was, I think, characteristic of what we were seeing. We were seeing somewhat an easier campaign for us evolving. And so that was, in a way, comforting.
Mr. Nolan, let's pause for another quick break. When
Sure.
we come back, more of your story from World War II and your service beyond that war. When we come back on Veterans Chronicles. Welcome back to Veterans Chronicles on the Radio American Network. I'm Greg Columbus. We are joined today in studio by retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Nolan. He's also a veteran of World War II. And, sir, we're going to get into some of your post-war service and other activities in just a moment. But I know that you've written 2 books now related to the bomber pilots and crews. One is called Isaiah's Eagles Rising, and the other is The Deadly Skies.
Yes.
Explain the inspiration behind those books and what you wanted folks to know.
Well, I think first of all, the first book, Isaiah's Eagles Rising, was probably motivated by my great desire to tell my children a little bit about me. I didn't really talk much about all of my experiences in combat and things like that with them. I wanted them to know. I wanted them also to know what it was like growing up in the 30s, the family that I came from during that period, which was stressful. I never finished high school. I have a college degree, but I never formally finished high school. I had 2 sisters. Each one of us quit high school at age 17, which was the legal date that you could do so, to go to work. And it was what we earned that kept our family going. So that was a stressful period. And I wanted my kids to know about that, and other people as well. And I think perhaps that was a major motivation that drove me into that book. It was also, I wanted to tell the story about, the subtitle of that book is A Generation of Airmen. And I think that puts it in context. What I was trying to describe was the passion that developed in my generation to enter this world and how we went through it.
How about the second book?
The second book was an attempt to describe the air campaign itself in Western Europe. It focuses on the RAF, what goes from the Battle of Britain on through the RAF Bomber Command, then on the 8th Air Force and the 8th Air Force experiences. There are a lot of them are in my first book. And finally, the Luftwaffe, which I wanted to tell their story. So, and I focused on Western Europe, so I don't discuss what happened in Russia nor in Italy.
Where were you on VE Day?
On a subway in New York.
Well, you're already home. Okay.
On VE Day? Oh, I'm sorry. I thought
Yeah, VE Day, May of 45.
May of 45. Let's see. I would have been in training in a instrument pilot training program in Lubbock, Texas. When Roosevelt died. That was, I think, in April of that year. So from that point on, I went through that period of training. It was about, I think it was 6 weeks long or thereabouts. VE Day itself, VJ Day, that was later. VE Day, I can't remember, but it was somewhere around May.
VJ Day ended the whole war, so do you have a more clear memory of that one?
Oh, much more clear, yeah. I was in Charleston for that one. In fact, the training I was going through there included some flight training in a C-87, which is a civilian version of a B-24. And I happened to be flying an instrument orientation problem above Charleston at about 6,000 feet with another pilot at that time, and we were doing a radio compass orientation. We were tuned to the local broadcasting station when it was announced that the Japanese had surrendered. So I took that C-87 immediately into a dive, flew down into the Charleston Bay in the harbor, turned and went up King Street, right over the treetops, as low as I dared get. And on the RPM, on the propeller controls, is a thing we call a gang bar, so I could rocket back and forth and get all four engines up and down and make a big racket. Sonny remembers that.
So you buzzed the town, basically.
I buzzed the town.
Oh, that's fantastic. So now, after the war, for about a decade, you were a transport pilot. So were you already in training for that?
Yes.
Okay.
That training really started down in Charleston when I was sent there to retrain in the C-54. From there, I was assigned to a group that was flying the North Atlantic, which I did for over about a 10-year period. Mm-hmm. But mainly out of Westover Air Force Base, Mobile, Alabama, and places like that where I was stationed.
You got to fly the huge planes.
Yeah. My favorite was an airplane known as the C-74, which was a grown-up version of the C-54, but with much bigger engines.
So when did you get to have fun with the jets?
I think I never really flew. I flew a turboprop version of a C-131 transport just for a brief period. I never checked out on a pure jet. I've flown it only once, which was the Collins Foundation P-51, which has a seat behind the pilot. And I did fly in that airplane. And I was very unhappy because I couldn't see anything out front.
Did you have...
I did control it, by the way, for a bit.
Did you have some common destinations? You mentioned the North Atlantic route that you took. Obviously, the Cold War is ramping up pretty quickly in those early days and beyond. So was there a specific mission that you were generally part of?
No, there were were different routes that you would be assigned to a flight. You knew you were going either to Rhein-Main in Germany, Casablanca, the UK, and possibly Tripoli. Any one of those. You wouldn't know until you checked in for the flight exactly where the flight was going. And then you would fly only a segment of it. You would fly, for example, from Westover through Stevensville in Newfoundland. You refuel there and then fly direct to Lajes in the Azores. And there would be a crew change. There'd be a crew waiting for it. The airplane would go right through, but the crew would be relieved. And you would wait maybe 2 or 3 days, and another one would come through, and you pick it up and go on to either Rhein-Main. You still wouldn't know. Mm-hmm. But the routes were fairly fixed in that respect, where you knew it would be the Rhein-Main, Tripoli, or Casablanca, or
so
whatever.
Once they finally told you where you were going,
yeah,
it
right.
was pretty standard. Mm-hmm. And you actually lived in the Azores for
mm-hmm.
a brief time, right?
Yeah, 2.5 years.
That's fantastic. And so then after doing that for about a decade, you had still another decade in uniform. What kind of roles did you have then?
My active flying as an aircraft commander probably ended in Mobile about 1952 when I was stationed there. I was flying with a squadron that was operating the C-74 that I mentioned. It was determined in the Continental Division headquarters, which oversaw this base at Brooklyn Air Force Base, and my group that I was flying with. They had an activity they were forming. It was called management analysis, and they wanted a line pilot assigned to give them the kind of operating experience they needed to do their work, and I was sent up there. In a way, it was a gift. I didn't want to leave what I was doing, but in a way it was a gift because it was the first time I had an assignment which had some stability about it. And as a result of that, I was able to pick up on my education. And and that started a 5-year program where I finally got my degree at the University of Maryland. But anyway, that was the gift that I got with that particular assignment. From there, I was sent to Germany in another activity like that. So it was a staff assignment, basically, but I still had to keep up my flying. As a matter of fact, the commanding general decided he wanted a C-54 to fly him around, and he hired an aide that I had checked out in the airplane, who, when he found me, he made it a point to include me in a lot of the flights so I could get my flight time in and all of that. So I was sort of the backup pilot for the general and in that regard. So it was a good assignment for me, and managed to work my way back into operations while I was there. And when I was transferred back to the States, it was on a thing called Bootstrap, which was a wonderful program that the Air Force had established to take people like me who were within striking distance of getting their degrees and giving them the whole semester off to where they could go to the university of whichever they've been working with to finish up. That turned out to be the University of Maryland for me. So the policy was to send you to the nearest air base to that university, and it happened to be Andrews. Now, I didn't want to go to Andrews, but anyway, that's where I wound up. And that, too, became a gift because while I was there, I was assigned to what was then the Air Research and Development Command, which became the Air Force Systems Command. And I had a very interesting staff job under General Schriever, who was the commander of AFSC at the time. And from there, I was transferred to the Pentagon. And that sort of did it. I wound up in what I called a blind career field and decided that in 1965 that I would call the shots on my retirement. And it just so happened that I was offered a job by NASA at that time, so I decided to retire from the Air Force and go to work for NASA.
Oh, that's fantastic. We've still got a few minutes left in our conversation here. And so you're joining NASA in the middle of the 60s, which is obviously an extremely exciting time there. Mm-hmm. What roles did you hold there?
Well, I was hired as the chief of program review, which was fine. They hired me to set up a management information system and some things I'd done for Schriever. That's where my name popped up over there. But I wanted to get into the technical management of a particular program, and my opportunity came with what was known as the Airborne Science Program at the time. The program manager for that particular activity had been reassigned, so knowing that I, as a pilot, would be in a good position to take over the program management of that particular function, it was given to me. And for that, I've been forever blessed. That was really one of the best jobs I've ever had, and I loved it. I wouldn't take anything for it, and would go back in a minute.
Probably seems like it was just yesterday, right?
I probably ought to explain what the airplane. It was a small complementary of aircraft that we had that were used as platforms for sensor development. We would fly prototype sensors that would be designed to go in space. And the aircraft were good platforms for doing that kind of work. Also for remote sensing research. We used them on the forerunner of all that activity. So that's what we did.
Fantastic. You also worked with Landsat, correct?
I did.
And what did that entail?
Well, I was a program manager for the operations program, which meant that I just oversaw what was going on with it. When they had problems, I had to report on all of the activity that was going on, the conversion to the digital systems, and all of that sort of thing were kind of under my purview with Landsat. Yeah.
Obviously, you were focusing on the programs we've already mentioned, but what was it like to be at NASA in the late 1960s?
Oh, exciting. Yeah. Well, the management then, it got very bureaucratic at a certain point, and I don't know what it's like now, but it was exciting when I was there. I left in 1981, but I wouldn't take anything for it.
Thank you for your service to our country and for being with us today.
You're quite welcome. I'm honored to be here.
It's been a great pleasure. We've been joined by retired U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Bernard Nolan, a veteran of World War II, a bomber co-pilot flying B-24s and B-17s. Later in his career, a transport pilot still in the U.S. Air Force, and then in the private sector, as we've just discussed, working for NASA. I'm Greg Corombos. This is Veterans Chronicles.